Welcome to another video. This one is going to be about negative reinforcement. In my previous video about positive reinforcement, I introduced the concept of adding stimuli to increase the probability of some behavior being performed or increase the effect of it, basically. Negative reinforcement is when there's a response or behavior that's being stopped, removed, or avoided through from a negative outcome or aversive stimulus. You basically remove the situation, or you want to avoid the situation. So there's two types of negative reinforcers or negative reinforcement. The first one is called escape or escaping reinforcement, which is just an example. If you're in a ranked game, imagine that you're in a ranked game. You're frustrated about something, you get tilted, super tilted, or some person is jumping off the map, there's another player AFK, and a third player just randomly quit. And it feels pointless to play. It feels really, really like a waste of time, essentially, and you just want it to stop. If you then quit the game or leave the game, that's an escape, basically. The second one is called active avoidance. And active avoidance is when the fear of something happening causes you to do something that will try to stop it from happening. This could be, for example, when there's a fear of confrontation, such as if you use an ultimate ability and your teammates ask you, why did you use that? And you might misunderstand their tone, you misunderstand the intentions, and you might feel afraid of taking the confrontation. So in that case, if you then would be silent, if you would try to make an excuse, if you would blame it on something else, then that's active avoidance, basically, because you're trying to avoid the actual fear of confrontation. Negative reinforcement is usually mistaken for punishment because of the word negative. And there's a distinct difference, because negative reinforcement implies that the removal of a negative condition strengthens a behavior. That's what the reinforcement part means. You increase a behavior. Meanwhile, punishment weakens a behavior or makes it occur less frequently, basically. And in punishment, you present or remove stimuli to weaken a behavior, while in negative reinforcement, you remove something to strengthen it. So if we take an example just to show how it's applied in Overwatch, if you imagine that you're on Genji and you want to use your dash ability, and you don't know if you will get a reset on the enemy. Maybe you can't predict how much damage you will do. Maybe you think the enemy will heal. Maybe the enemy isn't low enough on health and you just want to farm blade, etc. It could basically kill you if you mess up, and you're afraid of that. So if you then wait before dashing to have your deflect up, that's a sort of avoidance that you do in order to not die or in order to not take damage, because you're waiting to commit to something until you have your deflect. If we then take another example, imagine that you're playing Zenyatta and you're facing a Genji. You know that the Genji has a blade up because he hasn't used blade in the last two team fights, and you have your Transcendence up. In order to negate the damage from the blade, you save trance until you see him until you see or hear him pop the blade. And as you can see, it basically feels good to, or it not feels good. It strengthens the behavior of saving trance for a blade because you totally negate the blade. Meanwhile, let's say you have a Brig or something else, you have an Ana, it's really unreliable to stun or sleep a Genji with blade, of course, but that's why you put the Zen there. That's why you try to avoid having to do something much more difficult in order to stop the blade. You just take the easiest route. And the reason for mentioning this is because it's helpful when teaching new players mechanics that they don't understand or interactions that they don't understand, because numbers and the situations might play out differently in their mind compared to your mind, because you have past experiences to have. You have like a reference point. Meanwhile, new players might not have the same reference point. And if you then teach them through reinforcement like this, it's strengthening their intuition basically, because they understand immediately why something works, because they get immediate feedback. And that's why the negative reinforcement works, because it's immediate feedback that causes this learning behavior. And it's a learning behavior just like in positive reinforcement, just that there's no added stimuli. So if you then take it for an example with two experienced players that don't have anything new to learn, or maybe there is something to learn, but maybe they already know it. Let's say you have a Lucio player and a Zenyatta player in the same game, or in the same team, and they overlap their ultimates often. It's what used to be a common problem for many top teams. You'd overlap Zenyatta and with Lucio, for example, or maybe you use too many ults in other cases. Let's just use Zenyatta and Lucio as an example. If you think about the avoidance issue, or the active avoidance, one of them will have to actively avoid using their ultimate in order to not overlap the ultimate and basically lose value. And for example, it's really common that the Lucio player doesn't use his beat during a blade before a trance, because you want to use the beat for something else, since beat is more unreliable than a trance because of line of sight and so on. And in order to avoid that, the Lucio player can check with the Zenyatta, for example. He can ask, Zen, you're gonna trance when the blade comes, okay? And if the Zen then replies, yeah, I got it, then the Lucio can basically remove the fear of a blade killing everyone, basically, and they can focus on something else. And when they then see that the trance is used during a blade, that reinforces, or that causes a learning behavior for the Lucio and for the Zen as well, that makes it more probable that they won't overlap the ults in the future. And the same goes when we have, for example, Zarya and Rein together, and you have a Reinhardt with Shatter and a Zarya with Grab. If you say that you're gonna use Shatter before Grab, then if you do that, it's more likely that it's gonna happen again. If you plan for it and make each other aware of it, And that's basically how negative reinforcement works in-game on a basic level. Obviously, there's more complex ways of using it, but this is just an intro anyways. So now that you know how negative reinforcement works, think about how it's used outside of the game, and I'm gonna leave you with a question. Imagine that you're a coach, and during scrims, you have a new team. You're trying to teach them how to call plans, how to set up, how to snowball, etc. And you're calling the plans for them while they're playing. Some coaches do this, and it's a bad practice in my opinion, but before we get to that point, imagine that they're in game and you can't call for them. What behavior was reinforced? Why was it, and why is it that, no, let me rephrase. If you call the plans for them in scrims and then they go in match and you can't call for them, what would happen and why would that happen?